How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, February 8th, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers having won Super Bowl 55 yesterday, I think it's necessary to do an Elite Championship profile on them, as this will be the fourth championship profile, and this will complete a full cycle of at least having one team win a championship since I began this show, since sports started back up. Since all sports stopped due to COVID-19. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background just to give you a little bit of understanding as to how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers got here from where they were the previous season. Because after 2019, they were kind of a laughing stock of the league. Jameis Winston was their starting quarterback. And even though he led the league in passing yards, he threw for at least 30 touchdowns. He also threw for 30 interceptions, which is the first time a quarterback has done that in NFL history. So following that year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers decided that, first of all, in getting Tom Brady, they decided they were going to try to build a championship roster around him. So, of course, the big notable, the notable moves, or at least the players they signed back in, they brought in Shaquille Barrett back for another year, their outside linebacker. They're able to bring Jason Pierre-Paul, who was having some really, really good seasons. They also brought back Ndamukong Suh. They let go of Jameis Winston. They were also able to trade for Rob Gronkowski for like a seventh round pick, and from New England, because Rob Gronkowski is seriously considered not playing football again. And they were able to acquire Antonio Brown, who, at least through the 2010s, was one of the greatest wide receivers to ever play the game, and he still is, if you look at what he did last night and doing what he needed to do. And they actually didn't have that bad of a draft, as Tristan Wirfs ended up being one of their starting tackles for the most of the season, and Antoine Winfield Jr. Played a lot of safety this season. So, this would lead into the season where after putting up a 7-9 season, Tampa Bay would finish 11-5. That's 5 games better than the previous season. As a team, they would be the third best offensive scoring team in the league. They averaged 30.8 points per game. That's third behind the Buffalo Bills and the Green Bay Packers in terms of scoring. And in terms of yards per game, they finished about in the top 10, as they were third. They were fourth in the NFC behind the Vikings, the Packers, the Cardinals, and the Buccaneers. And then at the same time, on the defensive side of the ball, in terms of yards allowed, they were the sixth best team in the NFL in passing yards allowed, behind the 49ers, the Saints, Washington, and Los Angeles in the NFC, and also Pittsburgh as well. And then in terms of points per game, they were pretty top 10, as they finished 8th in the league in defensive points per game allowed. So of course this was a recipe for, I think in hindsight, we kind of see this as a recipe for at least making it to the playoffs and being a very dominant team. And then when you add who is quite possibly the greatest clutch performer in the history of the NFL, that kind of makes for a recipe for disaster for other teams. And then looking at how the Patriots did this season, or individually, starting with their quarterback this season, their go-to quarterback Tom Brady would play all 16 games, completing 66% of his passes, throwing for 4,600 yards, throwing for 40 touchdowns, which was a team record at the time, because he didn't break the passing yards record because Winston had thrown for more in 2019. But he also threw for 40 touchdowns compared to his 12 interceptions. And the 40 touchdowns, like I just said, was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers record, and this is Tom Brady's first and only season having played there. On the ground, their leading rusher was Ronald Jones II, who finished with 978 yards on the ground, along with his 7 touchdowns. Leonard Fournette was also a big contributor, as he had almost 400 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground for the season. Their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver, Mike Evans, who finished with 1,006 yards in his 16 games played. He's the only player in NFL history to have logged at least 1,000 yards receiving in his first 7 years in NFL history. So, of course, impressive season to him. He also broke the Tampa Bay Buccaneers receiving touchdown touchdown record with 13. And right behind him, Chris Godwin had 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. Rob Gronkowski, their future Hall of Fame tight end, finished with 623 yards in the 16 games that he played with 7 touchdowns. And also, future Hall of Fame wide receiver Antonio Brown would play 8 of the games because he was suspended because of his offseason escapades. And also, he tried to play for the Patriots last year. He didn't have a chance. This time, he actually got a full chance. He got a chance to play a full season with Tom Brady. He finished with 483 yards and 4 touchdowns in those 8 games as well. And then jumping to the defensive side of the ball, their leading contributor, at least from tackling, was Devin White, their linebacker at LSU, who led the team in tackles with 140 of them on the season in the 15 games he played, averaging just under 10 tackles a game. Leading the team in sacks was Jason Pierre-Paul, their linebacker, who was the only player who was named a Pro Bowler this season. Devin White, the player I just mentioned, who was named second-team linebacker, and so was Levante David, who finished with 117 tackles on the season. Devin White also had 9 sacks, which was second on the team behind Jason Pierre-Paul, like I just said. Devin White had 9 sacks on the season. Third was Shaq Barrett, their linebacker, who they re-signed, and Ndamukong Suh was able to get 6 sacks in his season back. Looking out to what was going on in the secondary, Carlton Davis led the team in picks as he had 4 of them on the season. Jason Pierre-Paul had 2 of them, surprisingly, to show you how good of a season they had. The only pick 6 of the season went to Jamel Dean. Looking at forced fumbles, Jason Pierre-Paul led the team in forced fumbles as he had 4 of them. Leading the team in fumble recoveries, Levante David and Jason Pierre-Paul each had 2 of them. And then nobody was able to return a touchdown. And then last but not least, looking out to how their kicker fared this season, Ryan Suckup would finish with 28 made field goals on the season, 58 PATs to give him 136 points on the season. So that's what Tampa Bay was doing. They finished second in the NFC South behind the New Orleans Saints, who are the only team in Tom Brady's 2-decade career that have beat him twice in the regular season. So, of course, he would have something for them in the playoffs. They would finish with the 5th seed because they were the top seed out of all the teams in the NFC that didn't win their division. So, in the divisional round of the playoffs, they would get their matchup against the Washington football team, who, of course, as of now, they're the Washington football team because they hadn't found a new name. But since Tampa Bay was a wild card team, they would play all of their games leading up to the Super Bowl on the road. In their first game in Washington, they would beat them 31-23. After the game got to as close as maybe being a 2-point game at the end of the third quarter after Taylor Heinicke's 8-yard run. But in the fourth quarter, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would create distance for themselves, outscoring Washington 13-7 to advance themselves into the next round of the playoffs. For Tampa Bay, their goated quarterback Tom Brady would complete 22 of his 40 passes, throwing for 381 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Leonard Fournette would lead the way with 93 yards and 19 carries for a touchdown, his best rushing game individually within the playoffs. The leading receiver was Mike Evans, who had 119 yards and 6 receptions, their elite wide receiver. Antonio Brown had 49 yards and 2 receptions and a touchdown, their future Hall of Fame wide receiver. And then on the defensive side, Levante David and Carlton Davis would finish with 9 tackles each, as Sean Murphy-Bunting had the only interception of the game. With this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would advance to the next round of the playoffs, which would bring them face to face with the team that beat them twice in the regular season, the New Orleans Saints. This one would be in the Superdome, but of course, people aren't gonna bet their money against Tom Brady. Going into the fourth quarter, the score was tied at 20. But then Drew Brees would turn the ball over a couple of times. Tampa Bay would get a field goal to go up by 3, and then Tom Brady's QB sneak with about 5 minutes left would put Tampa Bay up by 10, put them up by 10 points to the point where the game was out of reach. And with this, they would go on to the NFC Championship game, beating the New Orleans Saints for the first time this season in the playoffs in their third matchup since Tom Brady had joined the team. In this game, Tom Brady would complete 18 of his 33 passes, throwing for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, he also ran for 2 yards and a touchdown, giving him 201 total yards of offense with 3 touchdowns. On the ground, Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones Jr. ran for at least 60 yards apiece. Leonard Fournette also added 44 yards to the air to give him 107 total yards of offense, and his one receiving touchdown was the only receiving touchdown he had on the day. And then also Mike Evans, their elite wide receiver, his only reception of the game was a 3-yard touchdown from Tom Brady. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin White would finish with 11 tackles, 1 interception, and a fumble recovery on the day, as he was their biggest. He had their biggest performance out of all the defenders. Tampa Bay was unable to log a single sack all day, but they were able to get 3 interceptions. Mike Edwards finished with an interception, and Sean Murphy-Bunting as well. Bunting with his second interception of the playoffs. And with this win, they would secure a spot to face off against the top seed in the NFC, the Green Bay Packers, after they dismantled the Rams. And in this matchup, the Buccaneers would go to Green Bay, and they would eventually build a lead that the Packers wouldn't be able to come back from. The Packers would have a chance to. They were down by 5 at the end of the fourth quarter, and they just simply weren't able to score in the fourth quarter the way they expected to, as Tampa Bay's defense really locked on to Aaron Rodgers. And with this, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were just able to squeak by 31-26 to make it to the Super Bowl. But in this championship game, Tom Brady would complete 20 of his 36 passes, throwing for 280 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 picks, the most picks he had in a playoff game this year. On the ground, Leonard Fournette had 55 yards on 12 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Chris Godwin was the leading receiver with 110 yards for 5 receptions by almost 60 yards. Mike Evans had 51 yards on 3 receptions, and one of them was a touchdown. Gronk had one 29-yard reception, and it was a very big one towards the end of the game. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin White would lead the team with 15 tackles, as he had a fumble recovery as well. Sean Murphy-Bunting would get an interception in his 3rd playoff game straight, which is insane to go along with his 6 tackles. Shaq Barrett had 3 sacks on the night, and Jason Pierre-Paul had 2, as Tampa Bay had an amazing, just all-around team performance to get them past Green Bay. And let's not forget, up until this point, they had played all their games on the road in D.C., in New Orleans, and in Green Bay. And then finally, for the first time in NFL history, in what was supposed to be a neutral site game, they would play the Super Bowl in their home stadium, in Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay. And they would face off against the defending champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, who had won the year prior against the San Francisco 49ers. And then looking at to how this game fared, just Tampa Bay they dominated from the very beginning to the very end. In this particular matchup, Kansas City would get the scoring started as Harrison Butker's 49-yard field goal put them up 3-0 with 5 minutes left. Then to finish the fourth quarter, Tom Brady was able to find Rob Gronkowski for 8 yards on the left-hand side to give him to put them up 7-3. Going into the second quarter, Rob Gronkowski was able to score on a 17-yard touchdown pass to put Tampa Bay up 14-3. Then Harrison Butker's 34-yard field goal was shortened to make it a 1-possession game. And then with 1 minute left to go in the first half, with 1 minute left, and Kansas City giving Tampa Bay a timeout on a 3rd down to see if they could get the ball back, Tampa Bay was able to convert the 3rd down, and after a couple of penalties, they were able to drive all the way down the field, where Antonio Brown, the future Hall of Fame wide receiver, would get a 1-yard touchdown pass from Tom Brady, giving Tom Brady his 3rd of the first half and sending Tampa Bay into halftime up 21-6, which of course which puts the pressure on Kansas City in the second half. And then in the 3rd quarter, Kansas City would kick another field goal, making it a 12-point game. And then Leonard Fournette would break a 27-yard touchdown run to make it 28-9. And then a Ryan Suckup field goal with 3 minutes left would make it 31-9. And there would be no scoring after that, not even in the fourth quarter, from Kansas City or Tampa Bay. And with this, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for the second time in their history, are Super Bowl champions. and they are the first team in NFL history to play and win a Super Bowl in their home stadium. Tom Brady, with his 10th Super Bowl appearance, has won his 7th Super Bowl title. Rob Gronkowski came out of retirement to win this one. Antonio Brown, after a lot of people said he wouldn't play another NFL game after the dispute at his house, he came and he won a championship. And Ndamukong Suh, a player that they said would never win a championship, due to probably his off the field issue for what's going on with him, he was able to win another Super Bowl. Jason Pierre-Paul, last time he won a championship was when Eli Manning was in the league, and he won a championship. Just a lot of storylines, and I can't get to them all, but just amazing. Just the fact that Tom Brady joined this franchise in 1 year after the Jameis Winston 30-30 season, and he was able to turn them into a title contender just like that, even though he was able to sign some of the greatest NFL players to ever play the game. You still have to execute it and put it into action, and then finish the regular season, make it into the playoffs, and then simply not lose. And considering every single team that made the playoffs finished their season on a loss except for Tampa Bay, and Tom Brady should show you how amazing this team is, how historic it is, and just how amazing Tom Brady how amazing Tom Brady himself is as an icon. With that said, I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 16 minutes of this piece. It is Monday, February 8th, 2021 out here in this quarantine, and this is my 4th Elite Championship profile to go alongside the 2019-20 Bayern München team and Champions League, the 2020 Los Angeles Dodgers, and the 2019 and 2020 Los Angeles Lakers. And from now until next February, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the defending champs. And until the next season, until a new championship is crowned, I will address the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as such. And with that said, I want to thank you guys once again, and I will catch you with 3 individual profiles after this. So peace out. Thanks once again, and I will catch you tomorrow, or just with 3 pieces after this. Have a great day. And congratulations to the 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even as an Atlanta Falcons fan, this was an impressive season, a very historic season from beginning to end that will go down in the history books. And congrats to Tom Brady for winning yet another Super Bowl ring and another Super Bowl MVP. Dude definitely deserves all the credit. He deserves everything. With that said, thanks once again, and peace out. I'll catch you with the piece after this.